guys, welcome back. So if you watched the last video where I talked about some of the plants that I keep in this greenhouse behind me, including that I was planning on doing a bunch of totems, then you would know that I had offered to make a tutorial on how to build a totem. So that's what we're going to do today. It should be a pretty quick video. It's really simple and really easy. Here's an example of one that I just totemed recently. This is a Mekins. So a couple of things about toteming plants. If you are toteming a plant that hasn't been on a totem before, it might look a little funny at first because it takes a while for all of your leaves to face in a perfect direction. I'll like pin them to make sure that they're trying to encourage them to grow in the right direction. Sometimes they're kind of all over the place. So toteming. I love how plants look when they're totemed. This one is quite new on the totem, so it's not like it's fully filled out or anything yet, but it really helps encourage some larger growth, some healthier plants because they have that support. So a plant that may look really beautiful trailing with some smaller leaves may actually get larger leaves when it's totemed. It's just that it provides that support for the plant. And they love moss poles, so I'll actually show you. You can see the roots on that Mekins, just how happy it is to be both inside of the greenhouse and on a nice, well-hydrated totem. So not every plant needs a totem. It all depends on how they grow. So whether they're a vine, you can wrap them around a totem to make them grow up it. If they have that kind of branching growth, like a Tetrasperma or a Monstera, not a Deliciosa, but a Borsigiana. They'll grow up a totem well. So tons of plants, you can totally use them however you want them. You can make them small, you can make them large, and you can always add onto them once the plant starts to grow up it. Because you can totem little plants like this and really fill out a moss pole, but you can also totem really large plants. I'll put in some images of some examples of moss poles done by Craig Moran. And I will say this is totally a tutorial that I learned from his Instagram, and it's a very attractive way to totem plants in my opinion compared to others, and it's pretty easy to do. So that's why I like to follow this. They're pretty clean. Some moss poles have a lot of shedding, meaning that the moss falls off of your totem. It's pretty well contained in this kind of smaller meshing, and they really do work very well. So I still have some plants in here that I want to totem that I haven't made totems for yet. So I will take you over to the kitchen where we can make one of these moss poles together for one of my plants. Okay, so here we are now in the kitchen with the nice planting mat laid down so I make less of a mess these days. So like I mentioned, there's a few tools that you will need and a few products. So starting with the metal fencing. I think it's metal, plastic coated metal. Again, you can pick up a big roll of this for like 25 Canadian at Home Depot, something around that price. You will also need sphagnum moss. You will need something to cut the fencing. I just like to use these little wire clipper thingies. So they work well, handy for not damaging your fancy kitchen shears. You'll need something to tie off the back of the pole. I personally like to use zip ties. You don't need very large ones. You don't have to use zip ties. I believe it might actually be cheaper to like sew it shut with a metal string of sorts. But this is what I do because I am not good at sewing. So I already pre-moistened a little bit of sphagnum that I can use here. Then you'll need something to affix the plants to the pole. So this stuff works great. It's just, I think, like tomato tape. I really like it, handy for getting up close and cheap. Or you can use these bobby pins, and they are just at like, honestly, your grocery store. And like I showed, they're actually just meant for holding a bun in place, like an updo bobby pin. They work like a charm. So I've actually pre-cut myself a couple pieces of the actual fencing to use. This is just one long cut in half. Now these, you'll notice it's not too wide. If you roll it up and just overlap it slightly, you'll know approximately what size of post you're gonna end up with. So I have a couple of smaller plants I don't need massive posts for. I figured this is more than enough to go. So basically what we're doing is it's kind of like a sandwich. You're basically just creating your layout and then you are starting to stuff it. So you're gonna wanna pre-moisten that sphagnum for sure. It just makes it much more malleable to actually be able to pack it in. And truthfully, once you get this thing going, you can really pack it quite snug. So I'm going to really load this guy up. And you don't need too much in the actual, like where the soil's going, because it's not too bad to be able to have those, be able to just dig into the soil and really create a nice firm base. So we can give it a little test. That's not too bad. You can probably pack a little more in there. Now the ends, like I mentioned, you don't have to try and fill right to the ends because at the very end you can always pack it in. So once you've got most of that sphagnum in, what you're gonna do then is pick an end to start on. So we're gonna just make sure that that's all looking pretty full, looks pretty good. Again, if you find that you are a little short on sphagnum, you can always cram some in through these holes, so it's never too late. Now, I'll pull out a few of these. So again, starting on the end, I'm just gonna overlap. Let's see if you can see what I'm actually doing here. I'm just going to overlap these two pieces, and I like to have two of the squares overlap like that. So I like to just tuck it under, then I'm gonna be affixing this piece to this piece like that. So I'll do that over here. So like I mentioned, this is also the point where you can start to sew this thing closed. And power to you if you have the coordination. But if you can't tell, I'm not really the most coordinated human being. And I just find this to be a little bit easier. So you're gonna wanna make sure, again, that everything is lining up, because if you get to the end and you've accidentally screwed up your alignments of these squares, that sucks. I skip a few holes. Again, make sure that everything is folded over and lined up well. Okay, no judgment. Grab some tweezers to assist me because these things can be a little bit hard to feed through. Okay, so before we move on, I just kind of want to show you everything's lining up. And again, the ends, totally dropped sphagnum on my foot. So the ends, you can see this is overlapping. It overlaps by one little square just so that it's really firmly in there and snug. Okay, so I will speed through hooking up the rest of these. Again, I'm skipping just like a handful of squares while I'm going ahead. Okay, so last one. Beautiful. Now you will notice that some of the sphagnum does kind of hang out a little bit. You can really easily just poke that back in with really the blunt end of anything. Like a chopstick works, but like if you're finding that like you've got some stuff kind of hanging out like this one here, just tuck it in. And same thing goes for if you find that you have a spot that doesn't have enough. You can just take some sphagnum and like, if you find a hole, stick it there and plug it in with your little chopstick. So if you want to go around and make sure that you are comfortable with how much sphagnum you've got in there, you can go right ahead. Now, back to the clippers. That's all I use to clip off the ends, the extra bits here. Whoops. Okay, so there we go. We have now a moss pole, and that top, if you wanna go ahead and cram more in there, make sure that everything is like really nice and full. You can go right ahead. Same deal, go through. If you find any spots that you feel like, oh shoot, like I didn't quite capture that spot. Again, not always required. Like if you're comfortable with how much sphagnum you have used, then you should be good. Now, the nice thing is, because like I said, this is metal in here. Oh, there's another little spot with some hanging out. Poke that back in. So Like I mentioned, since this is metal, you can do different things with it. So you can, at the very end, just kind of give it a roll, make sure that it is nicely rounded off so that it has a nice, attractive look to it. But you can also shape it differently. Like, let's just say that you have like a Monstera dubia or something, and you really want it to have like a flatter appearance. You can go ahead and do that, really squish it flat to have a certain aesthetic, like really whatever you're looking for. You can kind of shape this into it. Okay, so there we go. Now that is made. I'll clean this up a little bit, then I'll show you how I actually put the plant on it. Okay, good enough, clean enough to get moving. So let's see, who should we pop on this pole? The Pinetti Partita. So now these little mats are great. I love to make a big mess. So I'll just dump that out. Now, a lot of climbing plants don't actually need that much soil. They'll start to root into the moss pole, all that, and really you don't end up putting them in too massive of a pot in the end. So even though we've got quite a good amount of roots on this, I'm thinking we can probably still keep it in this quite small pot. Well, let me see. We'll find out in a second, I guess. Okay, so I'm just gonna break some of the dirt off of the roots so that I can kind of put those roots around that pot. Okay, so now the roots are quite nicely broken up. I'm gonna test it in this pot to see if it's still gonna work for me, and if not, then I will move it up a 1/2 inch. Okay, little too small to fit both these roots, the big thick leaves, and the plant. So I will go grab a 4-inch pot and I'll be right back. Okay, back. So here we are, a very, very mild upgrade. Put a little bit of dirt at the bottom. Okay. Now, what we want to make sure is that we're getting this in a way that we're putting the stem up against the actual moss pole so that it can actually grow those nice aerial roots into it. Okay, now we're going to start refeeding some of that nice soil mix back into here. Again, this moss, the roots can grow right into it, both on the pole as well as in the soil. Okay, so since we've upgraded pot sizes, we're a little bit out of medium here, so I'm gonna grab some more. So I always kind of have a pre-made aeroid mix going. I find myself potting at all kinds of weird hours of the night, so it's better to not have to also mix yourself up some soil. I like to just do it in one massive go. Okay, now that should be in there nice and sturdy. Perfect. Now I'm gonna affix the plant. So like I mentioned, you can use this. It works really great. So you would just be attaching the plant just to help it sit along this nice moss so that it has a chance to root. Or you can use these nice little bobby pins, and same thing, you just stick them in. So I have a preference of using the bobby pins. You can definitely attach leaves in a way that's aesthetically pleasing to you, but the main thing you're looking to do is attach the stem. So this is, again, not a very long stem, lots of leaves, but there we go. I attached the main stem onto here. This leaf now, if I wanted this leaf to grow up and lean down this way, I could certainly pin the neck of it here. And then once it unrolls, it'll be facing, you know, the direction I want it. He's already a little bit of a ragtag plant. When you are sticking these little bobby pins in, make sure that you are not crushing the stem. Again, remember that this is a growing plant and it's kind of a little bit like putting a necklace on a baby. You don't want to have these bobby pins be right up on that stem where when the stem starts to fill out, the actual pins start to cut into it. Okay, so there we go. I've propped up a couple of the leaves. I'm not putting them right up against the moss pole either. I'm leaving a little bit of a gap there, at least where the leaves are. The stem can really go up close if you're able to get it close, because the stem will root, but these leaf stems will not root, so having them sitting on a moss pole where it's wet is not the best thing. But there we go. So this guy is now on a pole, and as he grows, I'll just continue to pin him into the pole. And you can see I made sure that those clips are all at the back so that that's not his visual. Now his bottom soil was quite moist already, so he doesn't need a whole lot, but I'll just water him in gently just to make sure that that new medium isn't going on him dry. Okay, then he can go back into his pretty little pot, on sale now at local chapters. And there we go. Now he'll grow up that really nice. As he continues to grow on this main stem, I'll continue to pin him just to make sure that he's growing as I want him to. I don't want him to have, you know, one stem starting to go out here. I'm going to make sure that he's really wrapping and going up this in the way that I want him to. So there we go. We have now made a moss pole successfully. So before I go, I just wanted to show you guys on this Monstera siltepecana exactly how these roots start to grow in. So there you can see, there is an aerial root and there's another one down here, but you can actually see this is coming off of the stem. But this plant no longer requires these little pins 100%. So to be safe, like I mentioned, putting a necklace on a baby, I am removing those pins just in case we have some stem thickening and growing into that. It is fully attached down here and right here. So it no longer needs my help. That's another reason why this isn't horrible. It's really, really soft. It's definitely not as aesthetic because again, you're gonna have a big green strip across your moss pole, but this has only been on a moss pole for a few weeks and it's already rooted in that much. So that goes to show that it doesn't take very long to attach itself to these things. Really easy to rehydrate these posts. You can either use something like this, like a squirt bottle, where you just basically like inject into it if you are someone who likes to take gardening slow like I do, or you can really easy just tip this guy, lean him under the sink, and rehydrate it that way. You definitely don't have to keep these moss poles wet all the time. You can definitely let them dry out a little bit in between waterings. And a quick aside before I put this guy back in the greenhouse, you cannot mist these moss poles back to rehydration. They are thick enough, even if you've made yourself a thin one, they are thick enough that your mist will never hit that core. So you're definitely gonna want to be finding a way to water it that will actually be hitting the core of that moss pole. So if you guys have any questions, definitely leave them down below. I'm happy to answer. If you have any other suggestions, things that work better for you, again, totally leave them down below so that other people can go and check it out. I totally recommend checking out Craig Milron on Instagram. Not only just for the fact that he has incredible plants, but it's definitely a nice way to appreciate your own plants more because you will see what a mature version of your beautiful plant will look like. And it's a nice little way to be inspired. So that's all for today. Thank you guys for checking this out. Definitely subscribe if you like what you're seeing. I'll continue to put out some videos for you guys. Thank you all again so much for your support, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, you guys.